Hi, everybody. It's the show with Ron. I'm Ron, and this is where we look at some of the news headlines that are being presented to us and see if we can add a little context or commentary and kind of put things into perspective. So let's get right to it. Here we have. I think this is a thing that can only happen in a kind of an authoritarian or autocratic state where a government can lose this many people and still continue on, if true. Of course, we also have to be aware there's a lot of rabble rousing in the Western media to make sure that the public in the Western democracies are on board with supporting Ukraine against Russia. It'd be very easy to just a lot of people just to say, who cares what happens over there? Europeans can take care of it, but Europeans won't take care of it. Has to be the U.S. But anyway, here we have Putin losing almost 500,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks and aircraft in Ukraine. I guess it's also the case that, if you have a semi-independent military, the military, generals and leaders, they're not eager to use weapons because the usage of their weapons destroys them, destroys their power base. Usually the military they want to have all those weapons because they want to have the budget that goes with it, but they don't want to expend them. So the fact that Putin has been able to do this much shows how much he has consolidated power in his country. We've got the new bill that is releasing many billions of dollars to Ukraine in different ways, so they can. Here's a 61 billion aid package last week, ending 6 months of congressional deadlock, and it's contingent on a whole bunch of different things. As we know, the European allies that are demanding the U.S. to step up and do this, a lot of them are not abiding by their agreements to raise their defense spending to certain percentages of GDP, which is, I think it's 2% in most cases. But they've, it's a tricky situation because the U.S. does know they have to get this situation under control, knock Russia back. The whole world has been derelict in letting things get this way, and no country can just sit back behind an ocean and say those things that are happening there do not impact us. But then the countries that we're protecting, Germany, even France, Sweden, those are the Baltic republics. Some of them are not investing a lot in their military and insisting that NATO pick up the pieces. A lot of those states are kind of cradle to grave welfare states with health insurance for everybody. I mean, if you're an American, you have kind of a system like that they've started in the last decade or so, thanks to President Obama. Got to give credit where credit's due. If you are a Republican, you should be for that kind of socialized medicine because that is the one thing in the United States that prevents people from being entrepreneurs, from starting their own business. If you don't have dependable and affordable health care, you're kind of stuck, forced to work for a big company to get health care, if you can even get it then. Here we have 72 Minutes to the End of the World, sort of a rabble-rousing book. I use that a lot, that term rabble-rousing a lot, because there is a lot of rabble-rousing in the media. This is an interesting article to read. I don't know if I'll read the book though, but this is just essentially a promotional article, an interview with the article with the author of the book about how North Korea hits the U.S. with some nukes, and then the U.S. Strikes back, and they shoot more weapons than they should because the evil generals are forcing the White House to hit all of the North Korean targets, and Russia mistakes that for an attack on them for some reason, and then the whole world ends in nukes because everyone shoots off their nukes. And I was interested when I read this scenario, which the article does point out some people take issue with. It says it couldn't quite possibly be like that, but this does hark back to the kind of the Cold War era thinking that a lot we saw, where you know, it was acknowledged that nukes themselves were the evil, and the only way to win is not to play. That's a line from some movie. I think it was from War Games. How scary the idea of mutual assured destruction is, but really, there doesn't seem to be any other option other than this very high risk scenario. And in the 30 some years since the end of the Cold War, there hasn't seemed to be a lot of will in countries to really tackle nuclear disarmament. And now it's too late because countries like Ukraine, that NATO and the United States convinced to give up their nukes in return for assurances that Russia would never invade them, they've been invaded by Russia. And NATO and the U.S. can't really do much about it, sort of let it all happen. So we're living in an age where there won't be any nuclear disarmament in any of our lifetimes. In fact, we're going to see probably more nuclear states as they have learned the lesson of Ukraine. Don't give up your nukes. Nukes, you got to have them to have some sort of protection. And then on the other hand, creates a very dangerous situation. Plot to wreck the DEM convention. This is a very interesting opinion piece. Of course, it's opinion piece because it posits some interesting scenarios about how convention protesters try to upend conventions, usually unsuccessfully. But of course, at the very last sentence of the piece, we see it's really all about Trump. Someone who writes this just can't. He has to show everyone how much he hates Trump, even though Trump doesn't really have much to do with the whole rest of the convention article. But this in the United States, of course, something that we watch famously, the 1968 Democratic Convention, where, as they say, a poorly disciplined Chicago police force brutalized protesters and journalists in front of television cameras. You know, that was really the height of all of the political agitation and the youth movement and the hippie stuff in the 60s, the horror and unease with the Vietnam War, the distrust of government that would come into focus in the 70s during the Watergate situation. So this talks about how certainly they're going to be the crazy, anti-Semitic, anti-Palestinian protesters who are going to try to disrupt Biden's convention, where he's going to be nominated this summer, and hopefully to push the Democrat Party further left. Of course, this is always a danger. We've talked about this in the past. In the past decades, going all the way back to the 80s, there's always been this concept of capturing the center. Each president has tried to say they are the kinder and gentler option. This is George H.W. Bush, the first president, who's trying to say, well, yeah, we're conservative, but we're like normal people. We're in the center. Clinton did the same thing. They identified the demographic of soccer moms. These were people who were the affluent, rich, white voting people who the Republicans had completely captured for 12 years. In all of the giant landslide presidential elections that had happened during that time. But Clinton identified there certain people who would be open to sort of the kinder, gentler, democratic initiatives, while at the same time Clinton himself was very strong on defense and foreign policy and engaged in that in the same way the Republicans were. So this is a center, and crazy stuff that happens at a convention might push one side or another out of the center. And then, of course, I guess I can't resist talking about Trump either. I think the Democrats are counting a lot that Trump, in his policies, stated, but especially as they're stated in the media, in the mass media, will be seen as too unusual or too extreme. There's certainly a break with the past in some of the things Trump has said about his engagement with other countries around the world. I know some people do make the case that kind of the breakdown of the world order has happened during the Biden administration with all of the wars and the rumors of wars, as they say, have happened during this time. The nations have felt the weakness of the American system. It's not all Biden's fault. It's the national debt as well. So anyway, conventions are kind of both interesting and boring. Usually there's no drama in them. They're all set. But it is, on the other hand, it is part of the panoply of American electioneering and the traditions that go back a couple hundred years. Okay. British monarchy, more about Trump's trial. The news has been filled with that for the last week, and I don't know. I haven't done as many of these context shows recently, just because I don't really like people who come on, especially YouTube, and tell you the legal ins and outs of a story or an ongoing trial, because the only way you can really know what's going on is to be there and hear all the points and to know the law and hear all of the instructions of how, from the judge, of how all of these things are supposed to be evaluated. So I don't think it does much. The U.S. media has all these shows that try to follow these trials, even not only political trials, but, criminal trials of people, and everybody's rooting or not rooting for a verdict, and then they're surprised by the verdict. You just can't second guess that. You've got to be there to pick these things apart. And otherwise, it's sort of a waste of time I think, to pull these trials apart. Let's see what else we have here. Dolphins now have bird flus. The bird flu. Seinfeld slams extreme left for ruining comedy. Certainly that's true. I mean, the point here is that if you were an artist, it is whether you're a writer, whether you're a filmmaker, whether you're a comedian, your job is to kind of provoke people sometimes, to surprise them and shock them. That's because a real artist doesn't put trigger warnings in front of their work. All of this culture has come up in the last 5 or 6 years. Never in the history of man has it happened, has it been in place before that. So these are new innovations. Nothing wrong with innovations, but I think we need some more rambunctious artists out in the world who are not worried to upset people the way things were up until about 5 or 6 years ago, and for all of human history before that. Chilling warning, anti-Taliban resistance leader warns terror attacks on U.S. soil. It's a matter of when, not if. Certainly that's the case. And certainly, I think for people of both parties in the United States, who everybody understands that the U.S. has to get out there and spend the money and run the world to make sure it goes in the direction that liberal democracies need it to. And this is whether the European nations want to pay for it or not. And it's whether the U.S. has a huge, giant deficit. The U.S. has to continue to keep making the world. And could be that a terror attack on American soil they might think that is something that would help their cause, because right now there's the idea that the American public, especially the young people, are soft. They are foolishly protesting in favor of Hamas, even Iran in some cases on U.S. Campuses, and perhaps an overreach by some terror group in the United States might awaken the American public and let people know that we have to sort these things out, or they're going to come right to our doorstep. Of course, we've seen that from the last 4 years in the world, as we've talked about how the international order has unraveled a bit. Countries invaded each other, and the U.S. showing weakness for various reasons, as we just talked about a little bit ago. I also wanted to mention this. I don't know. This is sort of my. This is not an important country. It's rarely mentioned. You're not going to ever see, usually, headlines about Myanmar being presented to you. But if you read, if you're really into it, like this is a great site, the Irrawaddy.com. They have all the ins and outs of what's happening bit by bit in all the parts of Myanmar. And this is, if you read some of these sources like this, there's also a good Karen news site. You might think that the whole military regime is about to fall, but I think there is some cheerleading from sites like this that overly make it seem like things are really going in that direction. So when I did see this article from the BBC, it does put it into a little bit of perspective. The bottom line is that the international community doesn't want a breakup or a breakdown of Myanmar. And by the way, for British people, everybody I've ever heard has always said Myanmar. I know there is some, I believe a BBC, they recommend it's Myanmar, something like that, based on whatever. But I've always heard it Myanmar for decades. But this country, the international community does not want it to break into pieces that might be exploited by China. And that's why we keep seeing countries, especially like Thailand, certainly operating on behind the scenes for the wider community to say, hey guys, why don't we sit down and have some negotiations? Now, for anybody who follows the history of this country, especially in the last few decades, you would be horrified by that, because the horrors that the military in that country have visited on its people for decades, the oppression and the human rights abuses are just unimaginable. So anybody who follows it would say, let's just stamp out this military that has dominated the country's politics since the 60s. Let's stamp this out finally. But sometimes those considerations are going to be subsumed by the needs of the international community, and that is why we now have the calls to sit down and negotiate with the evil dictatorship. Hold on, I'm still here. Disillusioned by the promises of the modern world, young people make their way to Bangkok and then on to the furthest places they can find. There are still unknown places. And I just heard my book is now available at Kinokuniya branches at M Quarter, Central World, and Siam Paragon. I really wanted them to carry it, and it's in literature, which is cool, so this is another dream come true for me. Read it and let me know what you think, please. Thanks. So that's the news for today. Am I still recording, or am I locked up here? That's the news for today. Hope you can hear me, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.